Today, the Arctic has increasingly become identified as a domain of potential great prosperity and cooperation amongst world civilizations on the one side, and a domain of violent confrontation and war on the other. Could the fate of nations hang on the future of this frozen frontier of the Earth? In 2024, Canada unveiled a new security doctrine calling for long-range missiles stationed in the Arctic. Canada is not alone in this Arctic defense upgrade, with a parallel $56 billion reform now underway in Norway, which recently had US warships making their presence in Norway known for the first time in 65 years. The extension of a long-range missile shield into Canada's Arctic would extend an aggressive ballistic missile shield that has already been developed encircling Russia and China, accompanied by an expanded NATO alliance, which has grown from 15 to 31 member states since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Further, NATO military exercises in the Arctic have increased in intensity over the past year, justified by an apparently inevitable war with both Russia and China. But is this last great undeveloped frontier of the Earth destined to be a platform of war? Or is there another path available to us? In 2007, the Russian government first voiced its support for the construction of the Bering Strait rail tunnel connecting the Americas with the Eurasian continent. In 2011, the Russian government restated its pledge to build the $64 billion project. Sadly, on both accounts, its message was ignored. In 2014, China gave its support to the program for building railways and advanced new development corridors uniting the new and old worlds. In 2019, this vision took on the form of the Polar Silk Road, extending rail and ports in the Northwest Passage, which offers to cut over 10 days of travel time for goods between Europe and Asia. And in 2020, former President Donald Trump gave federal support for a long overdue Canada to Alaska rail connection as a driver for an Arctic development initiative. So yes, another paradigm does exist for this vast territory, rich in resources and potential for cooperation. But has this view of the Arctic emerged as if from a vacuum in recent years? Or does this positive vision represent a major theme shaping the last 180 years of recent history? To begin to answer this question, we will travel back in time to an incredible diplomatic maneuver that saw Alaska sold to the USA at the end of a bloody civil war. The sale of Alaska stands out as an incomprehensible historic anomaly for many who choose to see history merely as a sequence of linear events determined by practical decision-making. Why did it happen? What motives did Russia have for selling this vast expanse of territory, so rich in resources, to the United States? Most people have come to believe that Russia and the USA have always been natural enemies, and thus this question becomes additionally perplexing. However, the answer will astound you. The year was 1853, and the world was falling into chaos. The Ottoman Empire was slowly failing, Russia was sliding into war, and the USA was heading towards its own existential civil war. Unbeknownst to leaders of both countries, a grand trap had been set. Advisors dominating the government of Tsar Nicholas I promoted the belief that Russia could take territories from the weakening Ottomans and promoted a foolish policy of expansionism, not realizing that they were falling into a trap set by the British Empire, which would soon see Russia fall into a 3-year wasting war against an alliance of France, England, and the Ottomans. This became known as the Bloody Crimean War, running from October 1853 to February 1856. The war's outcome saw Russia humiliated, indebted, and crippled morally and physically. In response to this failure, a new breed of statecraft arose as an enlightened Tsar Alexander II took the reins and ended the Crimean War. With his leadership, statesmen such as his brother, Grand Duke Constantine, General Nikolai Muraviev, Foreign Minister Gorchakov, and the great Russian ambassador to America, Edward de Stoeckl, gained a new level of influence, and a new foreign policy doctrine was created. This doctrine was exemplified by an enhanced appreciation of the destructive role of the British Empire's global strategy and the importance of America as a collaborator and partner to the Russians. In 1861, Tsar Alexander II and his brother quickly began tackling endemic corruption and worked to transform Russia by freeing the 25 million Russian serfs who had lived for generations as human cattle, earning him the namesake, the Great Liberator. This occurred only months before Abraham Lincoln was to earn the same title by announcing the Emancipation Proclamation, ending slavery in the USA. Despite the fact that neither man ever met each other in person, the US-Russia alliance that they established changed the world in ways that have still not come to be realized 170 years later. The British Empire was petrified that a Russian-American friendship would set into motion a great power alliance capable of undoing its global hegemony. Russia and the United States had already developed a historic bond with Tsarina Catherine the Great, leading the League of Armed Neutrality that guaranteed US victory against England in the 1776 Battle for Independence. And American engineers had helped to guide Russia's construction of its first rail lines connecting St. Petersburg to Moscow in the 1840s, under the leadership of George Washington Whistler. One of the few means Britain had at this time to keep these two historic allies from uniting remained its territories of Canada, and especially the colony of British Columbia. This colony was then an isolated and bankrupt outpost on the west coast, separated from Britain's other 4 colonies on the east coast by 3,000 kilometers of undeveloped wilderness, privately owned by the Hudson's Bay Company. For nearly 2 centuries, this private land was managed by Jesuits and Anglican agents of the Empire, and intentionally kept the frontiers of North America unexplored, as Canada was expected to be nothing more than a land of furs without any industries or infrastructure. An economy made up of fur traders, hewers of wood, and drawers of water, but nothing more. The explosion of technological progress within the young republic made this agenda precarious, and pressures mounted as Canadians looked towards their southern cousins and also began to crave the fruits of modern progress. By the time of the Civil War, dynamics of technological growth on both major nations flanking Canada resulted in a trend that saw Britain's grip over its colonies slowly slipping. Before the Civil War in the USA had begun, Tsar Alexander II's brother and advisor, Grand Duke Constantine, wrote to Ambassador Edward de Stoeckl, saying,
"The United States of North America should, in the course of events, be eager to conquer all of North America, and will therefore meet us sooner or later. And there is not the slightest doubt that it will seize our colonies without great effort, and we shall be in a position to retain them."
As early as 1853, Russian statesman General Nikolai Muraviev had already promoted Russia's sale of Alaska to the USA in a letter to the Tsar, saying,
"Due to the present amazing development of railroads, The United States will soon spread over all North America. We must face the fact that we will have to cede our North American possessions to them.
By 1862, the Civil War had begun in full force, and with Britain's City of London and Foreign Office supporting the Confederacy, tides had quickly turned against Lincoln. The British possessions of Toronto and Montreal served as Confederate bases from which dozens of terrorist attacks were launched against Lincoln's Union from the north. As outlined in the 2017 book Montreal City of Secrets by Barry Sheehy, even Lincoln's assassin, John Wilkes Booth, was proven to have been in Canada for over 5 weeks prior to the murder, where he received payment, training, and directions from British-sponsored Confederates. Just as British-sponsored battles were being waged against the Union from the Southern slave power, in Canada, over 10,000 British troops were stationed with orders to prepare for a full invasion of the USA, while in Mexico, Napoleon III's forces were stationed under Emperor Maximilian, prepared to invade in support of the Confederacy from the south. As the world watched with bated breath, Ambassador Stoeckel wrote to Foreign Minister Gorchakov saying,
"The disintegration of the United States as a nation would, from our point of view, be something to be deplored. The American Confederation has acted as a counterpoise to British power, and in this sense, its continued existence constitutes an important element in the balance of power."
He continued that he desired
the preservation of the American Union as an indivisible nation.
Surely, the outcome of the Civil War would have been much darker had it not been for Tsar Alexander II's deployment of the Russian Navy to California and Atlantic coasts of America in 1863, which kept British and French forces from assisting the Confederacy in open warfare against Lincoln. Today, many Americans would be shocked to learn that Russian soldiers were celebrated by crowds of thousands in San Francisco and New York during the height of the Civil War. Later describing his motive for sending the naval fleets, Tsar Alexander II said,
In the autumn of 1862, the governments of France and Great Britain proposed to Russia, in a formal but not in an official way, the joint recognition by European powers of the independence of the Confederate States of America. My immediate answer was, I will not cooperate in such action, and I will not acquiesce. On the contrary, I shall accept the recognition of the independence of the Confederate States by France and Great Britain as a casus belli for Russia. And in order that the governments of France and Great Britain may understand that this is no idle threat, I will send a Pacific fleet to San Francisco and an Atlantic fleet to New York. All this I did because of love for my own dear Russia. I acted thus because I understand that Russia would have a more serious task to perform if the American Republic, with advanced industrial development, were broken up, and Great Britain should be left in control of most branches of modern industrial development.
By December 26, 1864, as the outcome of the war in favor of the Union was blossoming, Secretary of State William Seward encouraged the Grand Duke Constantine to come to America with the following words.
I think it would be beneficial to us, and by no means unprofitable to Russia. I forbear from specifying my reasons. They will readily occur to you, as they would to His Imperial Highness, if his thoughts were turned in that direction.
In 1866, Stoeckel was called back to Russia, and after a lengthy meeting with Tsar Alexander II, was given approval to initiate the sale of Alaska to America. On the evening of March 29, 1867, Ambassador Stoeckel delivered the news to William Seward at his private residence in Washington, D.C. When asked if Seward wished to convene a meeting the following day, the Secretary of State asked, why wait until tomorrow? What could be done this very evening? At midnight, the office of the State Department was opened with a select group of Senator Charles Sumner, William Seward, and a few trusted members from the Russian consulate alongside Stokoe. As the sun rose on March 30th, the treaty was written finalizing the sale for $7.2 million, and before the ink was dry, it was presented to a shocked Congress who passed it in the following weeks. The strategic importance of this treaty was lost on no one. As discussions to extend railways from the USA into Russia via the Bering Strait was underway on both sides of the Atlantic, and just as Russian naval ships were arriving to the shores of the USA, both governments had given state support to the creation of a Russian-American telegraph line to be extended through the Bering Strait. In December 1864, Abraham Lincoln spoke of this plan to the U.S. Congress, saying,
"The proposed overland telegraph between America and Europe by way of Bering Strait and Asiatic Russia, which was sanctioned by Congress at the last session, has been undertaken under very favorable circumstances. Assurances have been received from most of the South American states of their high appreciation of the enterprise and their readiness to cooperate in constructing lines tributary to that world-encircling communication."
In order to prevent pro-American forces in Canada from declaring independence from a weakened empire, the 1867 British North America Act was signed establishing a North American monarchy antagonistic to U.S.-Russian cooperation for the next 160 years. The British hand behind the Civil War was exposed for all the world to see in the Alabama Claims of 1872, which was the world's first international trial, finding the British government guilty of militarily supporting the Confederacy. In recompense for this crime, Senator Sumner and Secretary of State Seward wanted the British to cede all of their remaining possessions in North America. Such an act would certainly have given great fuel to the extension of the transcontinental railway built between 1863 to 1869 through Canada and into Eurasia. But sadly, that would not come to pass. Desperate to keep its colony, British Columbia, from joining the USA, the British Foreign Office offered a bribe to its Pacific colony. A desperate Britain purchased the private Hudson Bay lands in 1870, canceled the colony's debts, promised to build a railroad from Ontario to the Pacific, connecting the isolated western colony with the eastern city centers of Ontario, Quebec, and the Maritimes. Russia had by this time positioned itself to begin construction of its own transcontinental railroad dubbed the Trans-Siberian Railway, with the help of American engineers. On its maiden voyage in 1905, the Trans-Siberian Rail saw Philadelphia-made Baldwin locomotives run across the Russian heartland, and it is no accident that all of the key players involved in the Alaska Purchase were also involved in the Russian Continental Railway program on both sides of the ocean. Abraham Lincoln's former bodyguard and first governor of Colorado, William Gilpin, was not least among this group. Gilpin had been known as one of the earliest champions of America's transcontinental railway from as early as 1846, and his hundreds of speeches, published maps, and writings went further than any other statesman of the day to concretize what those international public works would look like. Describing his grand design for international public works, Gilpin wrote in his widely read 1890 magnum opus, The Cosmopolitan Railway,
"Railways continue to extend themselves, soon to become a universal system over all the lands of the globe. We have seen the energies of the American people bringing into line and into use these new powers. Span the continent with the Pacific railways, they will continue to expand their works to Bering Straits, where all the continents are united. To prolong this unbroken line of cosmopolitan railways along the latitudinal plateau of Asia, to Moscow and to London, will not have long delay."
Within his 1890 book, Gilpin continuously emphasized his long-held belief that the inevitable awakening of China would be the basis for the renewal and salvation of the West.
In Asia, a civilization resting on a basis of remote antiquity has had indeed a long pause, but a certain civilization, although hitherto hermetically sealed up from European influence, has continued to exist. This ancient Asiatic colossus, in a certain sense, needed only to be awakened to a new life, and European culture finds a basis there upon which it can build future reforms.
By 1906, Tsar Nicholas II of Russia began to support the plan for the American-Russian Bering Strait tunnel, officially approving a team of American engineers to conduct a feasibility study. A New York Times article, dated March 27, 1906, titled, "For Bering Strait Tunnel, Tsar Approves Recommendations for All Rail Route to America." The article stated,
"The Tsar of Russia has issued an order authorizing the American syndicate to begin work on the Trans-Siberian Alaska Railroad project. The plan is to build a railroad from Siberia to Alaska by bridging and tunneling the Bering Strait. It is said that the enterprise will be capitalized at from $250 to $300 million, and that the money centers of Russia, France, and the United States will be asked to take bonds."
Sadly, instead of seeing a world embrace this vision for world cooperation, an age of assassinations and regime change was instead unleashed as the world slid chaotically into two world wars. Between 1880 and the start of World War I, dozens of leading statesmen who were supportive of global cooperation were killed by anarcho-terrorists, and in Russia, a foreign-directed revolution funded by London and Wall Street bankers ensured that the fragile Russian government would soon be toppled and the Romanovs murdered. Towards the end of World War II, the discussion of connecting the Bering Strait by roads and rail was again revived by American Vice President Henry Wallace, who described this post-war vision in a 1944 article titled "Two Peoples, One Friendship." In the article, Wallace wrote,
"Of all nations, Russia has the most powerful combination of a rapidly increasing population, great natural resources, and immediate expansion in technological skills. Siberia and China will furnish the greatest frontier of tomorrow." When Russia's Foreign Minister Molotov was in Washington in the spring of 1942, I spoke to him about the combined highway and airway which I hope someday will link Chicago and Moscow via Canada, Alaska, and Siberia. Molotov, after observing that no one nation could do this job by itself, said that he and I would live to see the day of its accomplishment. It would mean much to the peace of the future if there could be some tangible link of this sort between the pioneer spirit of our own West and the frontier spirit of the Russian East.
Despite small efforts to revive the vision for Arctic cooperation by Franklin Roosevelt and Wallace, the president's early death and the rise of the Cold War ensured that this vision would be set back for many years. Ultimately, the opening up of the Arctic as the new frontier of human development requires that Canada learn from Russia's plans to build 5 new advanced nuclear-powered cities, as outlined by former Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu in 2021. Shoigu's plans are informed by an earlier science city named Umka, which had been planned for Russia's high north and designed to provide comfortable housing for over 5,000 workers and their families. These workers would be engaged in both scientific as well as industrial work, as the Arctic Passage is quickly becoming an alternative to the Suez Canal, and will see a 5-fold increase of shipping traffic between Asia and Europe, according to current plans. Not only that, but the upgrade of the Trans-Siberian Railway and construction of a new high Arctic railway connecting a string of new ports will drive numerous leaps in engineering and interconnectivity. The attraction of providing long-term infrastructure to scientists is also inspired by the important study of cosmic radiation entering the Earth's atmosphere and biosphere from outer space. This phenomenon is sometimes known as the aurora borealis. Nowhere on Earth is this connection to the galaxy so apparent as it is in the Arctic, and nowhere could a greater array of discoveries into Earth science and even evolution itself be made than in the Arctic. The challenge of providing comfortable living standards amidst a harsh Arctic climate requires internal climate control, waste evaporation, internal agricultural capacities, and reliable energy, and as such, Russian designers of the Arctic cities have used the International Space Station as their model. This model city of the future echoes back to the planned domed city of Frobisher Bay in a territory that has come to be called Nunavut, which Canada's Prime Minister John Diefenbaker had committed to build as an integral component to his 1958 Northern Vision campaign. John Diefenbaker proclaimed this Northern Vision in 1958, saying,
"This national development policy will create a new sense of national purpose and national destiny. One Canada wherein Canadians will have preserved to them the control of their own economic and political destiny. Sir John A. Macdonald gave his life to this party. He opened up the West. He saw Canada from east to west. I see a new Canada, a Canada of the North."
Frobisher Bay's design, as produced by the Department of Public Works, announced a domed city encircled by 12 large towers housing 4,500 workers and their families, connected by an underground network of tunnels. In order to ensure that the city were truly one of the future, recreation facilities, shopping centers, and other amenities were included to ensure that the comfort of Toronto would be something accessible even in the Arctic. Ultimately, Diefenbaker's Northern Vision, which incorporated a bold roads to resources and frontier science program, was to be funded by a rechartered Bank of Canada. Diefenbaker's brilliant financing approach took a page from Alexander Hamilton and Lincoln's greenback system, which involved public bonds issued by Canada's National Bank in order to connect both old, maturing World War II victory bonds as well as new bonds directed towards Canada's development. Diefenbaker's vision for a true national credit system was encapsulated in his 1958 radio announcement.
This, the largest financial project in our history, offers an opportunity to all holders of victory bonds which were purchased as an act of patriotic faith during the war years to reinvest them for the greater development of Greater Canada. These monies that were advanced during the days of war and which contributed to the victory, we now ask to be made available to speed the pace of peaceful progress and the program of national development. The action we are taking will make it possible for our nation to embark on a new era of peacetime prosperity, far and beyond anything we have ever known.
While this national credit and Northern Vision program was sabotaged by a coordinated operation from London, Diefenbaker's strategy is just as applicable today as it was in 1958. Today, the Frobisher Bay Plan remains the paragon of northern development and complements the multi-trillion-dollar Trans-Eurasian Belt Development Program, which former Russian Railways President Vladimir Yakunin described on March 23, 2015, must be
an interstate, inter-civilizational project. It should be an alternative to the current neoliberal model, which has caused a systemic crisis. The project should be turned into a world future zone, and it must be based on leading, not catching technologies.
Since Yakunin's remarks, President Putin has unveiled his Far East development plan as a 21st century national priority for Russia. The development of new cities, mining, transportation corridors, and oil and natural gas of Russia's Far East represent one of the greatest boons for economic investment during the coming century, and already features an array of partners from China, Japan, South Korea, India, and other APEC nations. In May 2016, the University of Calgary's School of Public Policy published a study by Andrei Sulizenko and G. Kent Fellows called Planning for Infrastructure to Realize Canada's Potential, the Corridor Concept. This brilliant report outlined a vision for a North American development not seen in over 60 years, as its authors wrote.
The Northern Corridor would be approximately 7,000 kilometers in length. It would largely follow the boreal forest in the northern part of the West, with a spur along the Mackenzie Valley, and then southeast from the Churchill area to northern Ontario and the Ring of Fire area. The corridor would then traverse northern Quebec to Labrador, with augmented ports. The right-of-way would have room for roads, rail lines, pipelines, and transmission lines, and would interconnect with the existing southern-focused transportation network.
This work inspired the establishment of a study commissioned by the Canadian Senate Committee on Banking, Trade and Commerce, chaired by David Tkachuk in 2017, which produced a policy document called National Corridor, Enhancing and Facilitating Commerce and Internal Trade.
A visionary, future-oriented infrastructure initiative, such as the proposed Northern Corridor, would give rise to significant economic opportunities for Canada and would play an important role in the development of Canada's northern regions. Because an initiative of this scale and scope would likely take decades to complete, the federal government, on a priority basis, should ensure that a feasibility study on the proposed Northern Corridor is undertaken.
Vladimir Putin's multiple proposals over the years that the USA and Canada join in cooperative Arctic development is important not only because it would build trust, create business opportunities, and re-establish the lost art of long-term thinking, but would also help link up Western businesses into partnership with the Asian Pacific development process now being shaped by China's Belt and Road Initiative. Today, Russia's Trans-Eurasian Belt development is fully integrated into China's One Belt, One Road program and provides a model upon which the Northern Vision can be reawoken, bringing Canada into alignment with the BRICS on Arctic development, space, and nuclear research. The Alaska-Canada Rail Corridor, last endorsed by President Donald Trump with support from the Government of Alberta in 2020, with the construction of a development corridor extending 80 kilometers on each side of the railroad, the long overdue Alaska-Canada rail connection can positively transform the region and the peoples living there in its entirety. Power lines, new cities, fiber optic lines, and where necessary, fresh water pipes would be encased within the corridor. Cities, population centers, manufacturing, and scientific agriculture would be fertilized and harvested in this corridor as well. North America's abundant but largely untapped mineral and raw material resources would finally be made accessible by rail link and roads out of the frigid ground for rational use by humankind. The poverty-stricken regions of the world, sick of being exploited by empire and hungry for real development, would benefit immensely by such a new paradigm. As we look with hope towards a brighter future, let us be reminded of the words of Alaska's former governor, Walter Hickel, who had addressed a Moscow conference sponsored by Russia's Council for the Study of Productive Forces, when he said,
"As we look at the goals for the 21st century, it's fitting that we bring Russia and America together. There couldn't be a more important symbol. I have believed for many years that it will happen, and the place to start is the Bering Strait. Let's build a link between our two great nations, a tunnel to move people, resources, and goods east to west and west to east. The world's greatest reserves of natural resources await in Siberia, Alaska, and northern Canada. Let's build a rail connection to take that wealth to the world. Let's build a fiber optic cable link to improve world telecommunications. Let's build long-distance transmission lines to the 1.6 billion people on Earth who have no electricity. Show me any area in the world where there is a lack of energy, and I'll show you basic poverty. There is a direct tie-in between energy and poverty, energy and war, and energy and peace, and peace.